Through development of the surrounding area in Minnesota and ongoing court battles, American Indians have partaken in many conflicts that have become instrumental in coming to compromises on the legal standings of their rights for fishing on their land. The land of 10,000 lakes, home to some of the most beautiful wildlife and scenery this great country has to offer. This place is no other than Minnesota. Its unique combination of both lake and city life make it a priority for tourists and anglers of all levels. One of the most famous animals, of course, is the prized walleye pike, the state fish of Minnesota. Anglers from all corners of the world come to this very state to try their luck at catching some of these magnificent fish that cannot be found just anywhere. However, this classic Minnesotan experience of walleye fishing could all be a thing of the past if fishing disputes over the excess harvest of walleye are not settled.
Since the early 1800s, Minnesota has been a hub for negotiations and treaties for land and other rights between the government and the Native American tribes. For example, before European arrival on Ho-Chunk territory, the Ho-Chunk Indian group was best known for their hunting, farming, and gathering skills. They were aware of their surroundings and how to best utilize it. With the change of seasons, some of these families would leave fishing for the season and stick to hunting. However, the Ho-Chunk Treaty of 1855 was a big change, as this federal treaty transported the Ho-Chunk people from Winnebago over to a plainland area near the Blue Earth River here in Minnesota. So on February 27, 1855, the Ho-Chunk tribe under leadership of Baptiste Lassallier gave up nearly 1,000,000 acres of land, and in return they were granted 200,000 acres of land along the Blue Earth River. However, once the Ho-Chunk people became acclimated to their new area, less than 10 years later, President Lincoln put into action a signed order authorizing the removal of all Ho-Chunk people from Minnesota land. Many other Indian groups and their lands were prone to the quick development of the state government, with Minnesota acquiring statehood on May 11, 1858. Many groups such as the Ojibwe, Lower Sioux, and Chippewa had taken these agreements in order for some form of annuity, in order for the government to have large chunks of their land. The land the Indians had remaining were known as reservations. When Indians were signing these, they had little to no comprehension of the English language. This made for today's arguments with the Indian groups trying to reclaim some of their territories and rights, as they also claim their rights are being infringed upon, which is up for debate. The Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe is a sovereign nation that follows its own laws created by their separate government. They sued the state of Minnesota over the 1837 treaty. The treaty gave the band the rights to hunt, fish, and gather on the land provided by the government. Even before Minnesota was a state, tribes such as Ojibwe and several others signed this treaty that sold their land to the United States government, under the circumstance that they would be able to maintain their ways of living off of nature. In exchange for land, the U.S. government promised the tribes annual payments of $35,000 over a 20-year span. Payments were split between both cash and goods such as food, tobacco, and even blacksmithing tools. However, just like most treaties that the tribes signed, the guarantees and promises were reneged on. For a span of over 150 years, these treaties, especially the Treaty of 1837, were not publicly accepted, and it was not until the 1990s that the tribes wanted to claim what they had been entitled to the entire time. Fishing is much more than a hobby or way to pass time for American Indian tribes. It has been and continues to be a vital part of life, supplying them with a source of food and income. The tribes continue to rely on fish to fulfill their lifestyles. However, tribes have struggled with poverty and despair over the past few decades, which could consequently increase the pressure of harvesting fish to sustain families, while other jobs and food sources become scarce. The economy on reservations continues to dwindle. There is simply not enough fish to provide for everyone. As a result, casinos became a big part of sustaining the American Indian economy. This is seen by examining the unemployment rates of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Prior to the casinos, 80% of band members were unemployed. Many turned to fishing to stay alive. We spoke to Kevin Kramer, a knowledgeable source who has studied the reservation. He says,
"The way of life on the reservations could be seen as hopeless or even depressing. They fish and hunt for sustainability because the land provided to them is not fertile for growing crops."
The Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe tried to settle early disputes outside of court, but ultimately this was ineffective, forcing them to sue the state of Minnesota in 1990. This agreement would have required the band to withdraw their lawsuit, limit the Lake Mille Lacs walleye harvest to 24,000 pounds per year, and adhere to a band conservation code. In return, The state would give the band $8.6 million, 7,500 acres of land, and exclusive fishing rights on 4.5% of Lake Mille Lacs. The hearing occurred in June of 1994. Initially, Diana Murphy, the U.S. District Court judge, ruled in favor of the Ojibwe. However, 6 other tribes who also signed the Treaty of 1837 believed they were entitled to the same rights as the Ojibwe, resulting in another hearing later in 1997. The panel of 3 judges reaffirmed the original ruling, which allowed the tribes to practice the rights guaranteed in the previous treaties, included unrestricting fishing. This continued to escalate despite the confirmation of lower levels of government. The case was brought to the Supreme Court in 1999, where the same results were found in a 5-4 ruling. After this series of court cases, U.S. District Court Judge Michael Davis ordered the state of Minnesota to pay the legal expenses of the 7 bands, totaling $3.5 million. Native American tribes in the Midwest, including the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, trust that their rights to fish and hunt on their land should be unrestricted. Through treaties and multiple court cases, their way of life has stayed intact while still relying on the government to uphold the treaties. Fishing in Minnesota is a hobby and tradition that anglers enjoy taking part in. Many Minnesotans rely on the fishing industry as a whole in providing for their income. This includes resort owners and stores that sell boats, rods, tackle, and any other fishing-related materials. It is no surprise that Minnesota is so high on the list for many anglers that want a special fishing experience. Minnesotans spend on average $1.8 billion on fishing ranging from boats to lodging. According to the Minnesota DNR, approximately 27 million angler days are spent fishing each year. If every angler caught and kept just 1 walleye on average per outing, the state's entire keeper-sized walleye population would be wiped out before the year was over. The use of slot limits and possession limits help increase the size of walleyes on lakes. On Lake Mille Lacs specifically, the regulations regarding the possession of walleye is 1 per person, and it must range from between 22 and 20 inches, or longer than 28 inches. All this regulation is great, but the overfishing of walleye has caused a major strain on businesses and economy near Mille Lacs. In general, overfishing is a problem across the world in regard to the economy because it can play a pivotal role in the communities. Mille Lacs County Commissioner David Osling said, "We're hurting. We've dropped over $26 million in property value." Resorts have reported that their occupancy dropped by 60% in the last few years, said Karen McQuaid, a member of the Mille Lacs Area Tourism Council. When speaking with statewide phenom, pro-fishing guide Tony Roach, he said,
It's not overfishing that's killing the walleye population on Lake Mille Lacs. It's a combination of invasive species and unstable bait fish populations that are affecting the walleyes. Cannibalization and an increase of predators in the lake is also lowering walleye populations.
Despite this, Mr. Roach believes that the future for walleye in Lake Mille Lacs is bright, and things are starting to turn around. It's important to remember that these are hardworking people who rely on the quality of fishing to make a living. One could understand why they are frustrated with the number of game fish, especially walleye, plummeting to an alarming low number, to factors they cannot control. All non-Indian anglers abide by the strict Minnesota regulations regarding the methods of fish intake. This means that they cannot use netting and spearing tactics that are used by Native Americans. This is frustrating because those tactics allow for large quantities of fish to be harvested, taking away from non-Indian anglers. Resort owners and non-Indian anglers have fished the same way for decades, while the treaty rights of Indians were ignored. In recent decades, fishing has changed due to the treaty rights being verified, which has caused a population decrease in game fish. From this has unfortunately stemmed some anti-Indian sentiment. Ojibwe leader Bradley Harrington Jr. stated, "Anti-Indian racial tension has increased. People are simply upset about the situation, but that is no excuse for any sort of racial tension to arise. Simply put, non-Indian anglers want to be able to enjoy the fishing experience along with benefit financially on the business side of things. They need to be willing to accept the fact that the Native Americans have the right to hunt and fish, unregulated by the state of Minnesota."
The clash between Native American guaranteed fishing rights and non-Indian anglers and decades of their own practice is quite messy. This is not a black and white issue with a clear right decision that needs to be made. Instead, it is more gray, and neither side has a good answer as to how to resolve the problem of depleting resources that are so vital to both Indians and non-Indians who rely on fish to sustain their life.